I'd now like to introduce our speakers, Omar Mahmoud, Vicky Neff and Martin Oxley. Omar is a market researcher with 40 years of experience in international organisations. He held global, regional and local positions on several global brands including Pampers, Pantene, Pringles and UNICEF. He is co-author with Bernard Ross of Change for Good, Using Behavioural Economics for a Better World, 2018, and co-author of Change for Better, 2021. Vicky has over 20 years experience in research across various industries, consumer tech, B2B, B2C, FMCG, and food and drink. As Global Head of Consumer Insights at Logitech, Vicky led a 20+ team to support commercial marketing, brand building, market measurements, product development, and design. She is driven by curiosity and has a deep love for people, how they think, and why they act the way they do. Martin established BuzzBack in 2007 in Europe to exploit the transformational power of the internet, having worked at Ipsos and TNS. He's been a regular speaker at ESMAR, MRS and other industry conferences and has won the Best Case Study at ESMAR Congress. In 2009, he was awarded the MRS Fellowship for his outstanding contribution to the UK research industry. Martin, please go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Martin.
That's always a good start, actually, isn't it, to be muted? Although I think my teenage kids would love to mute me permanently. So, welcome everyone. I'm delighted you could join us today for our session on trust. And in the next kind of 40 minutes or so, we are going to have, trust me, a fascinating conversation about this thorny subject, especially as it applies to brands. And I think trust is really a fascinating topic because it applies to brands and politics and all kinds of things. But I think what intrigues me is that it can take years to build trust. It can take seconds to break like that. And it can take a long time to rebuild, if at all. You know, sometimes you just can't repair when you've lost trust. So people, as I'm sure many of you on the call will know, have been talking a lot about the relationship economy, the kind of fourth industrial revolution, moving away from products towards relationships and services. And as we know there, when you're building relationships, you have to build a relationship on trust and knowledge and so on. So I think if we, all of us on this call, are to succeed in this economy, we need to get it right. And we need to know how also to recover trust when it goes wrong. Because just as we are humans and we're very fallible, the machines and brands as well are fallible too. So what we'll do is we'll look at what trust means, who's getting it right, provide some advice from our perspective on which brands are getting it right, and also a little bit on how to manage it. But I'll just really sort of finish my introduction by just asking, why do we need trust at all? Well, I think if you think about trust, it's about relying on others, not just people, but things. And if we didn't trust those things and those people, if we didn't trust, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I'd get out of bed in the morning to trust my coffee machine, to trust my food, to trust the train service, to trust my car. So trust is really pivotal to everything we do. And I know some have said that trust is in a bit of a crisis today, but is that true? And I think just finally, before I hand over to Vicky and Omar to comment, is that, brands that do it well are almost invisibly doing it well. And some get it awfully wrong. So now what I'd like to do really is, with Vicky and Omar's incredible experience with some of the brands that Matthew just read out, I'd just really love if they could describe an occasion where trust was particularly important. And if there are bonus points available, it's about the use of insight in that. So if I could hand over to Vicky first and then Omar.
Sure, thanks Martin. Thanks for the introduction as well, Matthew. So having been at Logitech until recently, one of the examples of where trust was very important to us, we were faced with a moment about 5 years ago where we had some not perfect star ratings on some of the new products we'd released. And so we looked at the Amazon star ratings and we wanted to understand what was driving this down. And in the process of doing that, we wanted to have a look at what was the optimal star rating that showed that people really wanted to buy the brand, wanted to buy the products we were creating. And we actually saw that the optimal star rating to drive in market success was 4.2, not 4.3, not 4.4. It actually peaked at 4.2. And if I get my bonus points now, as we did a little bit of research with people, we went to go and understand what that was all about. And it came down to trust. People didn't actually believe. People didn't actually want to believe that something that had a star rating that was getting beyond 4.3 was genuinely of great quality and living up to people's experiences. So I thought that was really interesting. Perfection does not equal trust necessarily. And people want, we'll be talking more about authenticity, I'm sure, in a little while, but we'll dig a little bit deeper into that later.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vicky. That's perfection isn't trusted. Omar.
Yeah, I'll share an example from my most recent experience, which is UNICEF, and I worked on doing research for donations and fundraising. And unlike some other categories, when you make a donation, you do not get a tangible product in return. So trusting that the organization is going to make good use of your donation is extremely important. And in 15 years of research across countries, we found that trust is always the most important attribute in all countries. We've done brand tracking study and we had a list of attributes, almost 50 attributes, and then we found consistently that trust is number one. We also did statistical analysis and found that trust correlated very much with the overall brand perception and the intention to make donations. And in research also, we tried to dig deeper into what drives trust, and we found that there were two kinds of factors, one related to delivery, effective, gets things done, makes a difference, and so on, and also being transparent and using the money properly and not spending too much on administration and so on. And then the third step was to look for examples of how this could be done effectively. So in general, we drove the trust agenda in the organization and made the whole organization focus on that, which is really what building a brand is all about. Now, to mention also a very specific case, which I thought was very impressive, the case actually comes from Doctors Without Borders. And it was during the tsunami of 2004 when donations poured from individual donors, and Doctors Without Borders were actually overwhelmed with donations, and it wrote on its website to its donors that we've got enough donations, all the money that we can deploy, we got it. So please do not make more donations to the tsunami. If you'd like, we'd appreciate if you make donations to other causes that we're also supporting. And we've seen that as a result of that and other things that Doctors Without Borders were doing, it always got the highest scores on trust, and it became a very strong brand.
Great, thanks, Omar. It's great to hear about that, especially in the giving resources to different parts of the world. So that's a great introduction. But now I just wanted to move on a little bit to something that I know everyone on this call is thinking about doing, talking about, which is obviously ChatGPT. So in the interest of, as a market researcher, I should really listen to my audience. So if you could now go back to your Slido, and I'd love to see if, we don't know who's voting, so don't feel obliged to say yes, okay, or even thinking about it. So actually that feels about right, actually, to me. What was that, about 25% of people? We're going down. It's like watching the election results. But one of the things that lots of people now, as you have probably become apparent, are talking about ChatGPT. And I guess there's a bigger question, which is a rhetorical one. Do we trust it? But what we did as a team, the three of us, is we thought, okay, let's ask ChatGPT what are good ways to build trust. Mainly, it was a little bit of laziness on our part. Could the machine do it for us? So we got this result. But I think all of you that have used ChatGPT will appreciate that one of its downsides as well is it's incredibly verbose. So we said to it, can you be succinct? And this is what it came up with. It's still a lot. And I think actually what's interesting is right at the beginning, Matthew asked you if you could just type in what you felt was trust. And we didn't really get much more than a few words from you, other than this, which seems to cover everything. So Vicky, Omar, I don't know if you saw the things coming in, but did you notice any differences or similarities with what people in the audience were saying versus what ChatGPT was saying?
Yeah, so definitely saw lots of people talking about transparency and authenticity that are reflected in here. I think really when we look at what ChatGPT has come up with here is pretty much my experience with it to date, which is extensive and definitely gives you all sorts of things that are overlapping. There's no structure to it. So I think, yeah, the singular adjectives are more curated that you get from people.
Omar.
I think they're very much in line, but I was reading the input from the participants, and there were two words that I'm not sure they are here, and I think they're very important. The first one is that trust is about the belief, because you don't have all the hard data to trust, and if you have it, then you don't need trust because you have all the facts. So there is always an element of belief, and that's why when trust is broken, it really hurts. So I think this maybe irrational, emotional connection of trust is an important one, and of course it's a result of years of consistent behavior. Another comment that came from a participant was over delivering, and I think that's also important because all brands will try to deliver on their promises, which is of course very important, but if you can also under promise and over deliver, that's a plus.
Great, and thank you. And I must admit, I think, you know, my experience with playing with ChatGPT is that not only is it verbose, but it seems to cover everything. It struggles, and I think you've said this to me independently, Vicky, about being really focused. Like, you know, what is the one thing? It just seems to do a firing everything, and you sort it out. You find it. But equally, it's not bad, is it? It really isn't bad. So now I think if we could just we've talked a little bit about technology, and I'd just like now to hand back really to Omar, because I know Omar's got a very interesting interest in the history of branding and the history of trust. So Omar, if I could just ask you really to give us that sort of background to kind of where we've got to today, and then I'll hand over to Vicky to sort of take us forward for where, you know, she thinks and where we think trust is going.
Yeah, I mean, in all my work on consumer research and trying to understand consumer psychology, I know people are interested in behavior economics and how it influences decision making. I know people are increasingly interested in neuroscience, but the field that I think is still underutilized is evolutionary psychology. And the basic idea is that we are living today in a digital world with a hunter-gatherer brain. And if you think about our species as Homo sapiens, we are 300,000 years old. Of those, that means that people living at the time had the same brain that we have today for 300,000 years. And of those 300,000 years, only the last 10,000, we settled down in agriculture society, eventually villages, towns, and cities. But most of the time we were hunter-gatherer. So think about the hunter-gatherer psychology, the hunter-gatherer behavior, and how we see that in a high technology digital world. So for example, most of that time we lived in very small groups of 15 and 20 people. The implication of that from a trust point of view is that we like to have a direct personal contact. And also the world was divided into either family or friends or enemies. We didn't have acquaintances or colleagues. So again, we need to always, again, going back to trust in today's world, we need to feel we have a personal connection with other people like us. All this, what we talked about the connection. And if you remember the first phone, the first mobile phone before they became smartphone, you remember Nokia, the older of you will remember. You remember what its tagline was? Connecting people. It wasn't about the technology. And it's very important as the technology advances that we keep in mind that it is intended to address basic human needs. People don't love the technology in itself, but because it enables them to satisfy those basic needs. Also, throughout most of our history, we were communicating through facial expressions. We actually have in the brain a part that deciphers facial expression. body language and imagery. So again, in communication, don't just think about the words. When there's a conflict between the words and the images, people focus more on the images. And again, throughout history as hunter-gatherers, we were risk averse, because making a mistake and thinking that a snake is a branch of a tree can cause death. So, and that's why when trust is broken, it's a very big deal, and we should avoid doing that. So anyway, the general point I want to make, think of the consumer as a hunter-gatherer living in a very modern digital age.
Great, thanks, Omar. I must admit, some places I go on Saturday night, I'm not sure we aren't still hunter-gatherers. There are people who look like cavemen. So could Vicky now, so we've had sort of a little bit of the historical perspective, but I love really through the lens of your, your technology experience, if you could sort of maybe bring us up to speed a little.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I love what you said there about the connection with other people, Omar, because it is clearly one of our fundamental human needs. That's what drives us forward, right? I think for me, there are three reasons why trust might be, I don't think there is a confidence in trust, by the way. I just think it's a very interesting time for us to revisit what it is we take away from trust as we try building brands. And I do think it's an important time to revisit that for three good reasons. First of all, I want to talk about the fact that there's so much more of our work, of our commerce that happens online. Obviously, COVID step changed this, but it was a natural trend anyway, and it's a trend that carries on. So as we think about the products we buy online versus going into a store, there is a certain amount of consumer trust in will it smell like it looks like it's going to smell? Will the product actually look and feel like the product video says it will, right? And that's a little bit back to the star rating that I was talking about earlier. And I do believe, or it's my hypothesis, that this is why we're talking so much about authenticity at the moment, are things genuinely the way they're made out to be? And slightly related to that, actually, at Logitech, we did a study that I particularly enjoyed about 6 months ago, where we were trying to understand how is it we could make our webcams more appealing to women as they were trying to do their remote working from home. And a lot of our marketing there had been about look at your best. And actually what we learned in this research was women didn't want to look at their best. They wanted to look as they were. They wanted to look authentic. They wanted to turn up for their colleagues and make that connection like Omar was talking about. So I think that's one reason why trust is under scrutiny right now, is because with this extra distance, commerce business at a distance, we're looking for more genuine connection and understanding what the reality is. A second very, very big reason, data, and probably everybody in this call is more than aware that data equals money in today's economy. And brands want data from us, right? The theory is that when brands have plenty of data about us, then they can fine-tune the experience and make it so much better for us. But I think we all know the reality of that isn't necessarily true. We just spend a lot of time filling in our date of birth and having to unpick cookies.
Absolutely. And Vicky, I did discover, actually, it was my birthday a couple of weeks ago, and every pub I've used the Wi-Fi, I always lie about my age because I don't want them to bombard me. So now I've been getting emails for 3 pints of Guinness than it isn't on my birthday. So
all around the year.
Yeah, but it's tough. I'm going to drink them anyway. But I think now, just picking up the, one of the key themes, which was that we were, going to talk about brands, and hopefully you'll be able to see on the screen, and people now familiar with Slido can start to hopefully answer that question while I do the preamble. So, what trust, for the audience, what brands do you think people trust as opposed to necessarily yourselves? So, and then, of course, we have some consumer research that we'd like to show you to see whether you are about right or about wrong. So if people can start to type in the brands that they think people trust. I don't really mind where you're from, so don't try and get just, from your own country, perhaps, because I know there are people from different parts of the world. And then what I'll do is, as hopefully the results start coming in. It should form as a Wordle. So is anyone feeling brave enough to press enter? I think I might do one. Oh, wow. Cool. So please keep, putting those in. And as they're forming, obviously, we've had the benefit of being able to see the consumer research, but, some of them seem to fit. I'll move to the consumer research in a moment, but I'm just loving watching this data coming in. I'm trying to guess perhaps where some of the people are from. So after the event, actually, we will share some of this as well. So please keep putting in if you want to. But now I just really wanted to show you what the consumers have said. So here were the top trusted brands in the US and the UK. And so you can see two sort of word clouds, which is just here for simplicity. And you can see at the bottom some of the key brands that have come out. So what I'd be interested in, Vicky and Omar, if you could maybe give us some live commentary on, what you're seeing here and anything that you can pull out. And then I'll move next to China after the UK, US.
I think maybe what strikes me the most is what's not there. So there wasn't really any car brands or banking brands or entertainment brands. If I kind of do a quick summary of what seems to be coming out of US and UK is you've got Apple and Amazon, some of the big tech players. You've got supermarkets, retail, e-tail. And then there's some sports brands. So I think it's more what's missing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Omar.
Yeah, I'll make comments on three brands very quickly. The first one is Nike. And in terms of product performance, I don't think it's different from Adidas or other brands, but it has this emotional connection about just do it. And I remember when I was preparing for my first marathon, which I was dreading, I was wearing Nike and I was beginning to think like, I found it very hard to do half a marathon. How am I going to do a full marathon? And I just say, just do it, don't think about it too much. So I knew rationally, of course, that, the t-shirt I was wearing is not different from any other, but this emotional feeling was very helpful. Second one is on Amazon. And again, they are a good example of under promising and over delivering. They always tell me when the books are going to arrive and they arrive a day or two earlier.
Right.
And then Apple, I want to go back to the point I mentioned about the hunter-gatherer. Some researchers say that we have basic drives, 5 basic drives of our behavior. They're survival, power, relationship, territoriality, and sex. And we satisfy them in the modern world in different ways with different products. But if you think about Apple, it actually, or smartphones in general, they actually help you deliver on all these 5.
Right.
They help you, literally sometimes survive. They give you power to reach, they expand your territoriality and of course relationships and so on.
Yeah. No, actually, I hadn't thought of those in those terms. But the thing really that stood out for me is, although it's hidden, is none. And that's at about 18-20% level for both countries. And so, so there is obviously quite a bit of cynicism, as well as there are clearly brands, but also there's a good minority that say they don't trust brands. And I think that is something to learn from as well. I think, to Vicky's point, what isn't there, it'd be interesting to know why people don't trust, especially if they're transactional brands. Why wouldn't you trust it to do its simple transaction?
Well, can I just make a point there, Martin? Because I love what Omar said as well, and I think it kind of speaks to, this famous saying is, people don't remember what you say, but how you make them feel.
Yeah.
Maybe our jobs as marketeers is to give some kind of consistent feel to the brand, something that transcends the functional value of what we're delivering. And if you think about Nike and Apple, and maybe some of the other things we've seen at Volvo, do that really well consistently.
Yeah, I heard, and I can't remember where I heard this, but during the terrorist bombings in London a few years ago, apparently when people were running down the street to get away from the bombs, a disproportionate number ran into Boots, the chemist. not because it was the only store open, many were open, but because there was that familiarity and that perhaps trust about that brand. Who knows? But I thought there was something interesting, to Omar's point about emotion as well. When you're under emotional stress, kind of, what do you do, and where do you take that? So then, clearly here now in China, I think for me, when I was looking at this, I thought that the trends were actually quite similar to the UK, US, obviously a little different in terms of some of the brands, obviously a lot of Western brands as well. But Omar, Vicky, did you see anything you wanted to call out particularly?
The predominance of tech versus what we saw in US and UK. So Huawei and Xiaomi there, and Tesla coming forward. And we know that China's economy is very healthy compared to our economies. And that tech is leading. Oh yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think one thing that the none was actually very, very, very small, almost invisible. So maybe there is a more trust in brands if interpreting the research properly. So I think now, so we've looked at some of those brands. I think not so dissimilar to our audience. So pat on your back to the audience. There is a free video of this whole webinar coming straight to you as a prize for being accurate. But then we asked our consumers within the study to broadly try and understand what was driving trust. And so we did some analysis of it, and it's at a very high level, but here are the results of that. And we are doing exception reporting. So if it's different by market, we've called it out, and you can see it here. But Vicky, Omar, if I can pick on you, is there anything here you'd like to call out or provide some commentary for our audience?
I think it's just to stress again that trust is a multidimensional thing. There's an aspect of performance, like the first attribute we see here, quality of products and services. That's the raison d'etre for the brand. This is what we call sometimes the job to be done. So this has to be done quickly, properly. And then in the second blue line, we see the brand transparency and how it treats employees. This is the part that relates to the character. Sometimes we say that trust is competence, which is the first bar, and character, which is the second one. And then if you can add the emotional dimension, that would be a big plus.
Absolutely. Vicky?
I really like what Omar said there. I think kind of like thinking of the two sides of trust being the character and the competence. And I think the competence is not one of the reasons why trust is of interest today. I think it's the character side. And as I was starting to say about data, it's about, can we trust the character of certain brands to do the right thing when we're not there to make sure that they're treating us right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was listening to a podcast a few weeks ago about the food chain and how complicated it is to trust every element from field to fork, because companies aren't in control of every aspect. And some actually trying to bring in blockchain from the financial community to try and connect and trust, but very, very difficult to do. So that's why many companies are not doing seemingly much in this area, because it is so enormously complicated. So now I'd just be interested if there's anyone in the audience who wants to make any observation or comment on what they're seeing. Matthew, if there's anyone who feels like they want to make a contribution, or we could leave that to the questions later. So Matthew, are you seeing anyone that wants to make a comment here?
Yeah, if people want to raise their hands, I can bring them in on. It'll be audio only, or we can wait until later. But if people are feeling brave now, then yes, please raise your hand.
Metaphorically, I think, rather than.
Well, yeah, on Zoom, that is, yeah, just.
Okay. Well, if no one, well, we will be showing a video near the end, and which will give you time to collect your thoughts on the session so far, and so you'll be able to maybe ask your questions then. So
yes, we do have a couple of questions, Martin, but people in our audience, please do continue to submit to the Q&A. But thanks for your questions so far.
Okay, so I think so. One of the things we want to do, as I said, is we wanted to now just kind of briefly summarize. I want to show you an example of a brand, because we're up on time really. I'll show you an example of a brand that we think is doing something really good about trust, and then leave a little time for questions. So we've got essentially three key takeaways, one from myself, one from Omar, and one from Vicky. So if we, mine's the last one. So Vicky, no, sorry, Omar, I think yours was the first. So if you maybe want to summarize and expand on that first point.
Okay, I think I made the point about the hunter-gatherer, so maybe I will talk about more recent history on the last few hundred years. And the term brand comes from a verb that means to burn or stamp on something. And I think the term spread in the US when they were putting a mark of the farm or the ranch from which cattle came. And they were doing that for, and that was called branding. And they were doing that for two purposes, because sometimes the cattle would wander away from the field. And this was a way to prove, you think of it as a copyright or a registered mark, that the cattle belong to the person. And it was also a sign of the quality. And so, you know, that's why the iconic assets of the brand are extremely important also in today's world of information overload. These serve as shortcuts. When you think of Nike, you think immediately of the swoosh, you think of just do it. For other brands of similar products, nothing comes to mind when you mention the brand name.
Great.
So we talked about all the other factors, but again, the executional elements and the iconic assets are also very important in building the brand and building trust.
Thanks, Omar. And Vicky, the digital age.
Yes, so just coming back to a point I made earlier, I think we're at a moment now where when new business models are coming in, data is becoming really important. Scandals such as Cambridge Analytica makes us realize just how critical it is that we can trust brands to do the right thing by us, because we're not in control of where all of our data is anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've already talked about the third point here, which is, you know, my key takeaway, which is this importance of authenticity and being honest and truthful, because I think people will cut a little bit of slack if they don't feel that they're being lied to. And I think one of the other things what intrigues me as being, you know, not a digital native, is that the internet just never forgets. So, you know, you get something wrong and it can sit there for a long time. And there are certainly brands that I'm aware of that there is some, you know, criticism of their brand that just won't go away. So what does that brand do to address it? Well, it has to do good things. But the internet has a long memory. And so I think, you know, we need to take care, because trust, if you're not trusted in the past, it can also impact the present. So now what I wanted to do really is just show a video, which you can probably guess who it is, you know, if you can read at the top of the page. But this is an ad that came out just, I think it was just UK, just came out just after lockdown. And it was the way that one of the brands we saw earlier that is got very high levels of trust in the UK and US. It was the way that they expressed it to the world. So I want to run this video. It takes 2 minutes. It's well worth it. If you've got Kleenex, I'd have it ready because it's very emotional. But then when we come back, I'd like you to, hopefully you've got a few questions for the panel so we can address in 2 minutes time. So here goes the ad.
As coronavirus reached
Well, I must have seen that 100 times and it still gets me. So that was Amazon. So hopefully now you've had time to think and have a few questions for the panel. So Matthew, have we got any questions?
Yes, we've got quite a few interesting questions. Thanks everyone for submitting. The first question is from Brian Seal. Thank you, Brian. And he asks, how do you think about trust for your typical low-cost transactional CPG categories? To quote my B School professor, consumers don't want a relationship with their toothbrush. I know I don't. But is there some kind of role for trust when they stand there at the shelf?
Great question. Vicky's come off mute, so Vicky, you're on.
Well, I think going back to the model that Omar introduced earlier, if we think of breaking down trust in terms of competence and character, then I think it's wrong to assume that people want a relationship with their toothbrush in terms of they want an enduring relationship where you wish me a happy birthday. But you do want to make sure that your expectations of what you want from buying that toothbrush is met in terms of, can they deliver on giving you a good toothbrush that will do the job and will last as long as you expect. And then I think there is the question of the character of don't ask too much of people. I think that's really important right now in today's world, where brands are asking us all for data. They're asking us to believe in their sustainability mission, etc. Don't overstep the mark, because that's also part of the mutual respect and relationship. I give you what you expect of me, and you give me what I expect of you. So I think probably there's the wake-up call there for brands is, what exactly is the relationship that consumers want with us, and let's make sure that we give as much as we get there.
Thanks, Vicky. Omar, do you have a build on that, or maybe we could take one more question and then maybe finish on this next question?
I think trust is extremely important in fast-moving consumer goods, because these are products you buy on a very regular basis, and so any time this trust is violated, you can switch to another brand. Unlike, for example, a durable that you buy maybe every 3 or 5 years.
Yeah, great. And Matthew, could maybe we take one of the questions we had when people were subscribing, which we made a note of?
Yes, of course. Before I do that, though, someone has asked, will we receive recordings by email? And everyone on here will get that. So that's just to answer that one quickly. But yes, in the run-up to the webinar, somebody did ask, if we removed the word trust from our marketing vocabulary, what word would you suggest we use instead? Which is a great question.
Do you want to go first and then Vicky? Do you want to go first and then Vicky?
Okay. In my previous job, people often refer to reputation. I didn't like reputation very much, because it was always, usually it's defensive. We need to protect our reputation. While trust, I think you can look at it as we need to build trust. Of course, you can also build reputation, but the connotation of trust to me is something that you build, and as I say, it takes years to build. And so I don't see why we have to replace the word. But in the commercial world, to me, also trust and brand are synonyms. When I say this is a strong brand, I mean, it's a trusted brand.
Great.
Well, I just want to start by saying I love the question. I think it's a brilliant question, because very culturally loaded terms like trust and nice need to be broken down, and one way of doing that is to try and find replacement words. Confidence, I think, is the one that I would use, because actually Rachel Botsman is somebody, if anyone wants to check out Rachel Botsman, she's done a lot of TED Talks, and one of her key themes is trust in the sharing economy. And she defines trust as a confident relationship to the unknown. I think that's brilliant. To Omar's point, it's forward-looking. It also speaks to, it begs the question, confident to do what? So while we can talk about I trust a brand to do, well, to do what, right? I trust my Swiss friends to organise a great ski weekend, and I trust my British friends to organise a great party, and not necessarily the other way around.
Excellent. Well, I know we've run out of time now, so I'm going to thank Vicky and Omar very much for today's contribution, and it could have gone on much longer. I can't believe we've been going for over 40 minutes now. And so I'll hand over to Matthew to wrap up.
Yes, just to echo Martin's comments there. Thank you very much, Vicky and Omar, for joining us. And Martin, fantastic insights. I've really found it fascinating myself. And before we go, just a few dates for your diary. Martin will be presenting at the MRS in a webinar, presenting our work on happiness on the 23rd of March. The 28th rather, and 29th of March will be at IAX Europe, Amsterdam, with Mondelez Succeed. And late March, date to be confirmed, our next Buzz poll, the Buzz, looking at consumer telehealth. If you're already on our mailing list, you'll be receiving that. If you're not, then have a look at our website. And if you'd like any more information about anything that's been discussed today, then please visit info@buzzback.com. But thanks very much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.